Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed Christopher Nupin's sensitive and poignant film. And we're now going to hear a bit about the legacy of Jacqueline du Pre's life and music by speaking firstly to two musicians. So I'm delighted to introduce the cellist Natalie Klein. Natalie has been described by the Times as a mesmerizing and soaringly passionate musician. She came to widespread attention when she was just 16 years old, when she won both the BBC Young Musician of the Year and the Eurovision competition for young musicians in Warsaw. As a student, she was awarded the Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother Scholarship by the Royal College of Music. She completed her studies with Heinrich Schiff in Vienna, and she is a professor at the Royal College of Music and Music Academy Rostock. She regularly performs at major venues and with orchestras worldwide. I'll also be speaking to another cellist and a music producer, Francesca Terberg. Francesca is known for her specialism in Eastern European traditional music, particularly klezmer and Roma, and her projects have included studio composition, writing music for film and video games, and working with live electronics. She's one half of the critically acclaimed duo, Fran and Flora, with whom she has recorded and performed extensively across the UK, Europe, and North America. Their 2019 debut album, Unfurl, was BBC Radio 3 Music Planet's Album of the Year, and they've appeared live on BBC Radio 4's Woman's Hour and on Cerys Matthews' Six Music Show. Francesca has also collaborated with artists including Talvin Singh, Frank London, and Riz Ahmed. So, hello, Natalie. Welcome to our event tonight. Thank you for joining us. We're delighted to have you joining us from Germany, I understand. So, yes, just let's begin by talking about your thoughts about Jacqueline du Pre and how she has perhaps inspired or impacted on you and your playing. So let me start by asking you, can you remember when you first heard her play?
Well, actually, my first memory of her is a bit sad in a way, because I remember when she died. I remember that the news of that was on the TV, and my dad said, "Oh, that's very sad. A very important musician has just died." And that was the first time I think I heard her name. I was, pretty young. And then I started delving into my parents' CD collection, and started listening to recordings of hers. And of course, because she was really at that time the only really famous woman cellist. I mean, actually she's not, but at that time for me she was. So I was really fascinated, and of course fascinated by the fact that she had made recordings so young. And so she was a real inspiration from that point of view, an English cellist. And yeah, I listened to her recordings, and then pretty early on in my life too, saw the Nupin film, the Christopher Nupin film.
Okay, yes.
Which of course was fantastic.
Yeah. And what was it about her music that touched you, or do you think has been an inspiring thing or a significant thing for you?
I'm sure it's this incredible sense of freedom, physical freedom, emotional generosity, and a sense of joy, general joy, sort of emanating from every pore, I think, outwardly about music and about the cello. I think that that's deeply inspiring, and this kind of instinctive approach to music making. Well, of course, she's, iconically famous for the Elgar Concerto, and I love the recording that she made with Barbaroli, the first one. I specifically love that. And what I love actually about it is that it's devoid of cliche and devoid of exaggeration. And both of those things sometimes were kind of copied, I think, by later cellists, or even imagined in the minds of listeners. So I really love there's a real purity and the spontaneous reaction to music, which I think she was just such a genius at, and I love that. I remember recordings, for example, of Saint-Saëns Concerto that I liked, and Brahms sonatas with Barenboim. And of course, there's this, as well, the famous Trout quintet with
Yes.
Kuman and Perlman and Barenboim.
Yeah.
And again, I remember just the fun she was obviously having musically and personally.
Do you think she broke ground in the way that she played? Was it a different way of playing cello than had been done before, or approaching classical music?
I think those are two separate things. I think the approach to the cello was influenced firstly by her wonderful teacher, William Pleath, who was himself a phenomenal cellist, actually. He's not really known as a player, he's much more known as a teacher. But just last week, I was listening, a friend of mine who had studied with him as well, and also actually studied with du Pre, played me a recording of Pleath playing some Schumann fantasy pieces. And it was interesting, I heard quite a lot of Jackie there, and I realized that she got a lot from him, also in the way that he approached vibrato and phrasing and the use of the bow. And of course, she was influenced, I'm sure, by Rostropovich, who was such a huge name already when she was in the world as well. What's definitely groundbreaking is she was one of the first big stars, classical music stars in a modern sense. I think they were, concert in Carnegie Hall one day and a concert in Festival Hall the next. They were jet setters, real jet. I say they, together with Barenboim and of course a few others as well. That was sort of the beginning of modern stardom, in the way that also it's become a bit overrated now.
Yes.
Yeah. So in that way, she was a child of her time. I've always resisted that. Somehow it feels emotionally dishonest to think about this tragedy and this horrible illness that she went through. For me, I really don't think of her in that way. I think of what she achieved as a cellist in her young life, and the recordings she made. And as I say, this kind of effervescent joy and energy and instinctive animal-like music making. I know, again, speaking to this friend of mine who actually studied with her, that she was still trying to live her musical life in some ways through her students when she couldn't play herself anymore. But I prefer, for me, that's a sort of a private and tragic part of her life. I feel I would be voyeuristic almost to think about it too much. I would even go so far as to say that I'm a little bit allergic to this beautiful young heroine that never got the chance to get older, not be a young woman anymore. And the feminization of this is something I'm very allergic to. I was allergic when I was a young woman, and now being an older woman, I'm still even more allergic to this sort of idea that this young woman was so perfect at that time. And I don't know, there's something I don't like about when people use this story and talk more about the story than about her art and her craft and her talent.
What's the world of classical music like for women these days compared to what Jacqueline would have been going through? Is it possible to talk a bit about that?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's a big question. And an interesting one, and a one that I think to be continually discussed. I mean, in some ways, I suppose it mirrors what it's like for women in society general in all areas of our careers, which means that I think it can take time, perhaps a longer time, for a woman really to find her status. I think a young woman is a very marketable object, and that can work for or against us. And I think that the trick is to understand that, and I suppose use it in the way that's helpful, but to understand, luckily as a musician, we're in it for the long game. I'm talking now about soloists and my kind of career. And so and that's a process in a way to develop in the public eye in that way. And that's I think what I mean as well. She didn't get the chance to do that, and it's just terribly sad. It would be so wonderful. How old would she be now? Actually, she would be 70 something? Would she be?
Oh gosh, yes, she'd be in her 70s. So
I mean, how incredible would that be to have a woman like that?
Yes.
With a life like that, and the recordings she might have made in her 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Yeah. Who knows? I mean, I think of Martha Argerich in the same kind of world, and this incredible woman that has lived through many different ages of being a woman. And apparently she finally decided not to dye her hair black anymore. Now she, from one day to the next, she said, "No, I'm 65," or however old she was when she decided.
But we're seeing more women at the forefront of classical music, conducting at the proms, and in general being a little bit more high profile. So do you feel more positive about where things are going?
I do feel positive. I mean, I've always had some. Perhaps it's naive, but it's done me well, I think, so far, to say, forget everything around that. Focus on the things that are meaningful to me, which is my craft and my intellectual life with the cello and my emotional life with it and my musical professional life, the kind of the bread and butter of what I do. And just keep working at it. And there's meaning in that. And well, in that way, the longer I stay in the profession, the more I love it, and the more experience I have, and I start to feel confident, perhaps only now, really, that okay, I deserve to be here, and I know what I'm doing, and I have students doing wonderful things as well.
Yeah,
all of that. So
certainly do. Yes,
blessing in that way to be able to be in the profession long enough to have some kind of.
And can you tell us a bit about the Elgar cello concerto? I presume you've played it yourself, have you? On a number of occasions,
300.
A few times. What is it like to play, and what is special about it? What gives it such a powerful resonance? It's really hard not to be moved when you hear those opening bars.
Well, it's
all of it.
Composition. He was a genius orchestrator, and it's a heartfelt piece written at a very important moment, both in historical terms, exactly at the time of World War I, and personal terms for Elgar, the death, the realization that he's losing his beloved wife, and musical terms in the sense that Schoenberg has just exploded the scale and declared all 12 notes of the scale equal, and that atonality is the future. And we have a very old-fashioned, in some ways, composer writing very much music from the last century and seeing his life and his values and his world very much from the last century. And so it's a saying goodbye, I think, to almost everything he holds dear, every element of his life that he holds dear. So, of course, this affects us, because we can all relate. I think every single human being that has any kind of consciousness can relate to that sense of being aware of impending loss and being aware of how fragile and beautiful things are in this moment, and that they'll be gone soon. Very Jewish, actually. He's not Jewish.
Jacqueline wasn't Jewish, although she finally was. She converted, but I don't know how much she brought to her music of a Jewish spirituality. I don't know about that, but how about you, Natalie? Is that something you connect with in your music? Is it possible to?
Sure it is. Yeah, I mean, if you want a one-word answer, then yes.
Yes.
Of course. I think that it's not a conscious thing for me, but I think it's a great source of energy and inspiration. And more than that, I'm not sure I can say, but I sort of tap into some kind of a voice. And I mean, one of my very favorite things to play is Bloch Shlomo, which is exactly what he was doing as well, tapping into some sort of ancient understanding. But more than that, I can't really say. I'm not sure I want to put more than that into my I mean, I don't want what does sort of something sounding very Jewish, if we talk about quarter tones and a kind of cantor-like singing, I don't want to sound like that in the Beethoven sonata, definitely not. And probably not even in Elgar Concerto. It's something much more subtle than that.
Okay, thank you, Natalie. That's lovely. Thanks so much. It's been really lovely to speak to you. And
You too. Good
thanks
question.
for your reflections. That was lovely. Okay, I hope you get some. Our next guest tonight is Francesca Terberg. Francesca's joining us from the States, and it's lovely to welcome her to our event tonight. Francesca, lovely to see you and to have you here with us tonight, coming in from the States, where you're based. So let's ask you also, do you remember when and where you were when you first heard Jacqueline du Pre play?
It might have actually been watching the film Jacqueline when I was quite young, I think, which doesn't really count. Does that count? I'm not sure that counts.
Was that the first that you knew about her, or did you know about her from sort of quite early on?
I feel like in England she's got such a legacy that people talk about her quite a lot, so I'm sure that I knew about her. But in a way, she'll get thrown in like how people will reference other important cellists in history, but not in terms of what she actually achieved in such a short time. But I think that things are changing. I mean, I think that's to do with like the way that the classical like the way that these classical dynasties are kind of referred to, and rather than thinking about like what like and everything's also quite romanticized about her, I think. So rather than thinking about what she really actually achieved, which was like an incredible amount of work and output, and like it is in such a short time, and she was in a completely male world. It's just crazy. It's totally crazy.
And let's talk a little bit about the music, because yours is very different from that classical genre. You play klezmer and Roma influenced music, and it's a very different type of music. Do you think you're influenced by her playing, or what has influenced your playing, your own cello playing?
I wouldn't say that I would have ever tried to sound like Jacqueline du Pre, because also, I mean, like, I do think physique comes into how we can make sound on our instrument. And she had like very long limbs and big arms, big hands, and a very specific style of playing, which would have come from her teachers. But I think like her rigor and her power are like unbelievably inspiring. And that's my favorite thing about her playing. It's just like unrelenting like power and passion, and that's inspiring. And I do often like watch videos of her playing online. If I was going to watch any cellist play the cello, it would be her. Definitely. Yeah, there's not many female cellists that have achieved what she's achieved.
Yes.
And I mean, that was so long ago, and it hasn't really changed. I feel like she represents something, actually, in terms of just like power, just pure power.
And a very distinctive legacy that she's left that wasn't there before, and perhaps hasn't been the same since then.
That was actually quite classic even for its time. I mean, there was a lot of experimentation going on in those years. But I also think that the way that she presented it and the way that she played it was radical.
How important is that to you, that you can reflect some of your own background and identity through your playing? Is that a sort of conscious choice, the Jewish aspect?
No, it's not conscious. I mean, I think that's something that I was called to do. I wanted to be a musician, and I didn't quite know what direction to take it in. And when I heard klezmer music, it just made sense. And that was a long time ago. I mean, I was like in my really early 20s. I was just finishing my undergraduate degree, which was in anthropology. It wasn't in music. And I need to do things that really make sense to me and that mean something to me. And that just spoke to me. it's kind of it informs my sound, and I'm now very lucky to be part of like a really wonderful international community of people who are very passionate about that music. I'm also interested in sort of the avant-garde and like experimental music, and I just spent the weekend at Bread and Puppet, which is a political puppetry company up in Vermont, where they really,
I know
it's
them.
amazing.
Yeah,
It's amazing. So it's like, yeah, like I think there's a lot of things that inspire me, and I try to kind of bring that into my musical being. But I think I have got
one of those.
Sorry?
And the Jewish part is one of those.
The Jewish part is like very much at the base of it. It's like what I know. I feel like I know it, you know?
Mm.
And I worked so hard on that in my 20s. I didn't grow up with klezmer music. I grew up with sort of Germanic synagogue music, which is beautiful. It just kind of made sense. It just kind of made sense somehow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time. Thanks, Francesca.
Thanks so much for asking. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye. Our final guest today is Rabbi Ariel J. Friedlander. Rabbi Friedlander grew up at Westminster Synagogue, where her late father, Dr. Albert H. Friedlander, OBE, served as rabbi. After a career as a sport and theatre photographer, she went into the family business and currently serves Or Amim, a progressive community in Bologna, Italy. Her father knew Jacqueline and supported her in the last difficult years of her life, and he wrote about his friendship with her in his book, A Thread of Gold, Journeys Towards Reconciliation. In a moment, Rabbi Friedlander is going to read a passage from the book, but first I'd like to ask her about her own memories of meeting Jacqueline. Welcome, Rabbi Friedlander. Lovely to have you with us tonight. So to start with, can you tell us a little bit about your memories and impressions of Jacqueline du Pre?
Thank you. Well, growing up in London, my father was just in Rutland Gardens, and we lived in an apartment above. So Jackie lived at the bottom of the street. So she was a neighbour. We would often see her going up and down the street with Ruth Ann, and also she came to lunch. She came to dinner a few times, mainly because my father, she wasn't a member of our synagogue, but she liked to meet with him, and he would go and spend most Saturday afternoons with her. Also, after she left Rutland Gardens to Notting Hill Gate. So she was very much present in our life in those days.
So when would this have been? What sort of period? In the 60s?
No. This was near to the end of her life.
Okay.
Yes, because she was already in a wheelchair, and sometimes it was difficult for her to speak. But my dad knew and how to understand her, and in fact, as she got more ill, then she didn't visit other people so much. But he still went to see her every Saturday afternoon.
And did you get a sense of her personality and what sort of person she was through those brief connections at that time?
I got the impression of somebody who had a very strong personality, but who was frustrated because she couldn't express herself as well as she wanted to, particularly when she was speaking. But I mean, just generally, of course, my mother was a professional musician, and so we knew her music, and we had seen her photograph and heard her music before, and had this very, very vivacious and brilliant image of somebody. So, but we didn't know her in those days. We knew her much more near the end, and it came across very clearly that she had a lot more that she wanted to do, a lot more she wanted to say, but in those days it was really very difficult for her.
Okay, well, thank you for those really poignant reflections and memories of Jacqueline. And let's hear now, you're going to read us a passage from your father's book.
A good deal has been written about Jacqueline du Pre. Some of it is myth, some of it is attacks on the family, some of it is true. But the real truth cannot be found in the texts, but lives on in the music. The song does not cease for the singer, and in the memories which constantly bring us back to the blessing and the tragedy of her life. These memories become small and pale if we try to put them into words. We occasionally talked about religion, but it was rarely the main topic of our conversation. Jacqueline du Pre was a Jew, but she had become a Jew too quickly and too easily. Daniel Barenboim and Jacqueline came to Israel in the Six-Day War to play for the troops. They were full of enthusiasm. They wanted to get married, and Jacqueline was converted to Judaism in a day. That's what she wanted. That's what Ben-Gurion wanted. Usually, it takes years of study to become a Jew, but the rabbinate in Israel is a law to itself. One day, including immersion and an examination before the rabbinic court. Now, they wanted to get married. As the story goes, the rabbis were flabbergasted, but one has to wait months after baptism, they said. It would be a sin. But clever Daniel, with his knowledge of the Talmud, is said to have remarked, which is the greater sin, to get married straight away or to live together straight away? So they got married. Jacqueline did not enter into a covenant of faith, but a covenant with Daniel, with Aida, her good mother-in-law, whom she loved ardently, with Pinchas, Yitzchak, and all Israel. This covenant also counts. When we talked about it, she was well enough aware of that. She was no longer a Christian, much to the grief of her pious family. She was a Jew, but one of those who confront God in doubt and hesitation, yet nevertheless identify with the Jewish family, though they themselves do not have much to do with religion.
Thank you so much for sharing your memories of her with us and for reading the beautiful passage from your father's book. And thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Friedlander, and thank you to all our guests tonight, Natalie Klein and Francesca Terberg. It's been fascinating to get an insight into the musical and the personal world of one of classical music's most enthralling musicians, and it's a reminder of what a distinctive and thrilling performer she was. I'd also like to thank Caroline and Matt at Allegro Films, and of course, we're truly indebted to the director, Christopher Nupin, for creating such a beautiful and memorable tribute to Jacqueline and her playing. We shouldn't forget that this film and the others that he made of her in the 1960s were groundbreaking works that reshaped the way classical music was portrayed on film. I'd also like to thank Gil Karpus at JMI for all his work in putting our event together tonight, and special thanks to JMI's Jennifer Jankel, without whom this event would not have been possible. Finally, thanks to you, our audience, for joining us for this special event tonight. We hope you've enjoyed it. To find out about similar upcoming cultural events, please visit the websites of JMI and Jewish Renaissance. Good night.